Welcome to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. This is Joshua Mead. I just wanted to preface this episode by saying, number one, my audio wasn't plugged in properly, so my audio is not going to be the best. I apologize for that. And then at the end, our internet feed was abruptly cut off, and so it's going to end kind of abruptly. I'll give a summary at the end of this, but we are talking about a very important issue. It's the issue of stress and how missionaries face and deal with stress and trauma on the mission field. And so this is definitely a weighty topic, an important topic. If you think this will be a blessing to a missionary or maybe someone who loves and supports missionaries, be sure to share this episode with them. And again, we apologize for my poor quality of audio during this podcast. That being said, enjoy the podcast. Thank you for listening. You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Erik Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Erik. Welcome to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. We are excited to be back with you to speak about a topic that I think it's universal, no matter what line of work you're in, but it is a topic that missionaries rarely talk about publicly because we don't like to be negative about our experiences. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but these are issues, and I think there are a lot of issues that missionaries need to speak about publicly and to deal with, to learn how to navigate. And that's part of what this podcast is about, is to speak about missionary life and missionary issues to help missionaries. That's our goal, ultimately, is to help missionaries navigate some of the challenges of missionary life, and then to inform our supporting churches on how they can best interact with, engage with, and pray for the missionaries that they support. And so, Erik, today we are going to talk about the topic of stress, specifically in the context of being a missionary. So, do missionaries face stress? Have you ever heard of that? Is that the thing?
You know, there's lots of things you can deal with on the mission field, but one thing that is universal on every culture, I think, when it comes to missions is stress, Josh. It's stress. And it comes in so many different forms. It comes, and in fact, I want to ask you right now, when you think, what's the most stressful or one or two most stressful things when you think I'm in Senegal and this is something a stress that I find? Maybe it's not something that bothers you, but it's just this environment, this situation brings you stress.
I would say medical is at the top of the list, knowing that, am I going to be able to take my kid who's sick here to get the right care? There's, a lot of times doctors don't work all the time. They're not always there. So medical's at the top. That can be a very high stress factor. For me, traveling, I love to travel, but that initial, we've got 15 pieces of luggage for 5 people. Can we handle this? Is coordinating the logistics. So I love traveling, but it's just that logistics. And then I'll say as well, the stress of re-entering, either when you go back or when you're coming back to the States or to your home country after being away for a while. So when you come back to Senegal, we just recently came back, and there's automatic stresses to coming back. It's 110 degrees here with 90% humidity. I probably change my shirt 5 times a day. Okay, it's so hot. And so when we first came back from the summer, home in the States, we came back and I gave ourselves a week of just, not really doing much, just slowly transitioning back into life and letting our kids get back into it and all that. So those are some of the stressors. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, you mentioned ones that I agree with. Some for me are driving. I'm sure that's stressful in Senegal. It's very stressful here. The craziness of the driving. One of the things for me is hosting groups. American groups can be very stressful. Though it's a blessing to have them in, and they do amazing work. You are in charge of all those Americans and those same issues you mentioned. If something goes wrong and they need medical attention, as has happened in the past, that is a high stress. Making sure that everything goes well, getting them on that airplane and getting them home. And then for me, number one is what you mentioned. It's really traveling back and forth with your family. It's not so much, I don't stress out really at all when I'm by myself, but getting the family from point A to point B internationally can be quite stressful. In fact, that's one of the most stressful things. And it's not just, like you say, coming back to your field from the States. A lot of times for me, it's going into the States because we're moving around a lot and going from sometimes house to house or church to church or place to place. And you can get sick there, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that, getting health care there. Though it's good in America, it can be quite expensive, and there's trying to find doctors in places where it's not your home. And so, and by the way, let me say this. America is very stressful. In fact, my trip back home this last time, a lot of the stress I had to do with being in America, and I realized how stressed out Americans are. And it really came to a point, and this is where I kind of want to just take and run with it now. In my life, I'm 47 years old. I've had some adjustments physically in the last couple of years, and I did not realize I was about to have kind of a watershed moment in my life where, we had been home for about a week and a half or so. We had done some fun activities, but Holly and I finally got off to ourselves. We got a few days. We were going to visit some churches, but have some off days as well. Well, once that started, we got off by ourselves. We almost never get to go off by ourselves for a few days. It was going to be 4 nights away, and it had been a long time. And so I was very much looking forward to that. But I noticed as we would go to maybe some stores or around, I started feeling things in my body, like different, tingling sensations. I just didn't feel very good. And I was starting to get worried, like, what's going on? Is this, your body starts telling you something wrong, you need to get checked out. But, I walked, I exercised, I tried to do a little bit of exercising and tried to listen to my body, but I couldn't quite figure it out. Nothing dramatic, not some major pain, but just something wasn't right, and I didn't know what it was. And well, fast forward about a week later, I'm in the pulpit preaching for a pastor, and about halfway through the sermon, I did not feel good, but I was able to finish it up and even answer a few questions. But we went over to the pastor's house that evening, and I was like, they were having ice cream or something, and my chest was hurting, and my arm was very much tingling, and you think, is this the beginning of a heart attack? Like this is not right. And I reached out to this pastor, a dear friend of ours. He's been on the podcast, Pastor Dennis Harry. And I know that he had himself gone through different situations, but he would be someone I could confide in and ask some of these questions. And I remember asking him, talking about it. And he said, well, I'll tell you a story. A man that's our youth leader, he's in his 30s, and he had some symptoms of a heart attack a couple years ago. Didn't do anything about it, and then a few days later had a major heart attack. Thankfully, he didn't die. And I said, that's a pretty good story. That's a good enough reason for me to go ahead and just get this checked out. I feel like a dummy if I didn't go to the emergency room and have a heart attack. You know what I mean? Like, I'm glad you told me that story. Let's go. And so he led us in his car, and Holly and I went behind, and he stayed with us as we waited in the waiting room for a number of hours. Well, as we got to the emergency room, they took my blood pressure, and it was very high. It was over 180. But thankfully, they also do an EKG right away, and they found out you're not having a heart attack. Your heart's fine, and we'll take a look at you in a few hours. A number of hours later. But I basically spent the whole evening, a whole night, in the morning time doing all kinds of checks on my body, and they really couldn't find anything. In fact, when I left in the morning, my blood pressure had come down, and they had done blood tests and X-rays and not MRI, but a CAT scan. EKGs, they did all of it, and they couldn't find anything. They didn't even give me any medicine. They're like, I'm not sure, go see your primary physician. Well, I'm in the middle of North Carolina. My primary physician's back in the Dominican. And we drove home to Georgia the next day, and I praise God because it's hard to get into doctor's offices here in America. And we found a physician that was taking patients, and we could have an appointment in like 2 hours. And so I praise the Lord. We went to that physician. Oftentimes in America, the doctors won't talk to you very long, but this gentleman, young guy, did a great job. He sat there for like 45 minutes, heard my whole story, and ordered a bunch of blood tests. And so, long story short, we went through a bunch of these tests, and we found a few things. Found a little bit of high blood pressure, and maybe a little bit of high cholesterol, but nothing really to put a finger on. And he said, you might just be going through some transitional times in your life physically, and that brings on some anxiety. And sure enough, between that visit and another visit with him, I had a number of episodes where they weren't all, in pulpits. One time it was in a pulpit. I got up. I alerted the pastor that I hadn't been feeling very good, that something happened. He might have to be ready. And I basically got up there and the room was spinning, and I got to say about 8 words and just say, "I'm sorry, I don't feel very good. I need to sit down." And I went back in the back lobby, and I just felt like I was going to have another heart attack. And it turns out it's a stress attack or a panic attack, what people call it. And I would talk to the doctor. He said, "Well, what are you stressed about?" I guess I said, "Well, I think I'm stressed about my health. I don't feel very good." And then it kind of just it's kind of a snowball effect if you've ever gone through that, which is something I just never had gone through. And so I praise the Lord that I learned a lot through these episodes, and some of them weren't in front of people. Some of them were after long travel days, and just basically coming down from some high stress days when you drive like 12 hours. And, what I learned was I really had a breakdown, stress related. We had gone in the ministry really hard the last 2 years. And I think like when we finally kind of let up, that stress just came crashing down on my body. And what I learned was I was not as healthy as I thought I was. I really wasn't. And I was more overweight than I wanted to admit. And from that time on, I really made some dramatic changes in my life. Spiritually, yes. I mean, I feel like in many ways I've just come closer to the Lord and put more of the world to the side and gone closer to Him, which has been really refreshing and like a spiritual revival in many ways. But really, the lifestyle changes of just making health, good mental health, but also physical health, the top priority. Because I think my greatest fear, Josh, was what was happening was I was really having difficulty getting up and speaking. And I praise the Lord for these pastors. I didn't stop speaking. I slowed down my schedule, but I didn't want to just like go cold turkey and not do anything. And so I would alert these pastors. And Josh, every single time I talked to a pastor about what I was going through, I was amazed how many had gone through very similar circumstances. Maybe not exactly the same, but had really dealt with high anxiety, high stress, difficulties that they had to power through. And that was really encouraging. But what I learned was that I was not as healthy, maybe a little bit spiritually, but mostly physically and mentally, and really had to do a hard reset in my life. And then learn that you can't get rid of stress. I don't know that there's anybody who can really get rid of stress unless you decide to be a monk on a monastery up on a mountain or something. Stress is going to be present in your life, but the question is how you're going to handle it. And I'm really thankful for really good friends who came over and prayed with me. We took prayer walks together. In fact, I had that incident I mentioned where I had to step down from the pulpit, and I really was discouraged that night because pretty much since I left the church, I felt better physically, and I thought, Lord, this is really hard. Like, I stand up for a living, and I talk to people about the Lord, and I know that after looking at all these tests, I don't have a physical problem. Why is this happening? I want to serve you by telling people about you. And so I was really discouraged. Well, the next night we had a chance to go to a church service where we didn't do anything but just listen. And an old seasoned preacher got up and he had 4 points about, he ties these knots. And he says the knots of our life. They were like fear not, fail not, faint not, and there was a fourth F. My kids remember. I think it was I don't remember. Fail not, whatever. But it was so impactful, and it was like a breakthrough. And just the Lord's like, you're going to go through struggles, you're going to go through trials. You might even have more anxiety in this stage of your life. But what you want to do is lean on me, and you need to make the changes. And boy, I'm so glad I've gone through this. But I want to encourage missionaries to reach out to other people, reach out to friends, and talk about some of the challenges you go through. It was really amazing. I never knew these about some of my closest friends. An old roommate I was talking to, a couple old roommates, had really had some major physical things, especially with anxiety, that I didn't even know. We were roommates. And I wanted to maybe bring my story out a little bit to encourage guys to really reach out to friends, talk about their struggles, and then help them deal with it. By talking about it, I learned a lot of tips. I learned a lot of tips about how to avoid your phone in the first couple hours of the day, to really, meditate and work out, your physical body to really and then to take on your fears head first. And so I wanted to kind of talk to you, Josh, about maybe some of the things you've gone through. Maybe not exactly that way, but through stress related pressure, because that's what it is. How you've learned to handle it, how maybe things you've learned over the years, and how maybe you're still kind of trying to make adjustments.
The stress you're describing is definitely, your body is more gets more out over time as you're carrying the stress of the nature of the work that you do as a missionary. And I think that's an important point you make. You can be in a really good place spiritually. You can know, and I think that's why it creeps up on you, is because you know you're in a good place
Mm-hmm.
spiritually, you're in a good place with your family, you're in a good place with your wife, and then all of a sudden, why is this happening to me, right? And so there, your body,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, when it's unhealthy and you are dealing with stress and you're spiritually carrying that burden, but your body's not handling it as well, and we can neglect
Mm-hmm.
that, the body aspect. And look, when your body's unhealthy and you're dealing with stress, you might be able to handle it spiritually, but your body's trying to compensate, and it produces different hormones that can cause that anxiety to come on. It can cause that
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming feeling to come on. And I've had similar experiences, and in just not me, I feel like, oh, I don't get stressed out that easy. And then a day comes by, and all of a sudden you're like, why am I feeling dizzy? Like, what is going on? And so it just comes sneaks up on you. I think there's other stress. I'm going to share some of, like, where from my standpoint, things that I've done, and I hope it can be a help to other missionaries as I've tried to learn and am still trying to learn to work through it. And then I think there's another aspect of stress that it impacts and affects us mentally without us realizing it as a missionary. And it comes out when there are other everyday stresses. And that I think can be categorized under
Mm-hmm.
what people call post traumatic stress disorder, where you've had a traumatic
Mm-hmm.
experience that you haven't processed. And so you go through another stressful situation, and whether you are thinking about it or not, your body's responding to that stress of this traumatic incident you might have experienced that you haven't worked through yet. I want to talk a little bit about that. But for me personally, mine is more a mix of the spiritual aspect and some, I try to keep myself healthy. I try to exercise regularly. Going back to the States is always where I kind of lose the regular discipline and routine of exercising. And then there's so much junk food. I usually, put on a few pounds when I'm stateside and just, don't feel that well. But I do try to maintain, keep myself physically in shape. But at the same time, that doesn't guarantee that your body is going to be able to handle the stress. I think it helps, your heart, your mind, all of that. It's all tied in together. God made us the way He made us for a reason. For
Mm-hmm.
me, I would say the way that I've learned this over time, the way that I deal with stress is to just kind of isolate myself, is to just kind of, okay, I'm gonna get away. I'm gonna walk away. I'm gonna be by myself and be alone. That's not always healthy. Now, if it's, hey, I need to retreat for a minute to seek the Lord and to overcome this situation, that's one thing. But I think for me, and I don't know, maybe there's others who can relate. That's why I want to share this. Is sometimes if I'm going through a stressful situation, whether even if it's a family thing, even if it's my wife and I'll retreat, but not to seek the Lord's help. I'll retreat to just not deal with it. I'm just gonna walk away. I don't want to deal with
Mm-hmm.
this right now. And an incident happened recently, and I want to share this because I want other missionaries, whoever's listening, or anybody who's listening, to understand that uh, how we handle situations, stressful situations, it impacts not just ourselves, but it impacts those closest to us. So my youngest son has been dealing with just he's been very obsessed and anxious over where I am. in the States.
Hmm.
He's always like, "Where's Dad? Where's he at? Is he okay?" When I travel, and it was really became an obsession. And I thought, okay, it's not just like, "Hey, what's my dad up to?" And then even since we've been back here, we've been back for a few weeks now. And even if I leave the room, within a few minutes, he's like, "Where's Dad? Is he okay? What's he doing?" And I thought something's
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
right here. There's something happening, something in his mind. And my wife and I would talk about it. And I think as we were talking about it, and as I was thinking about, okay, what would be causing him to be? Is there something I did that is causing him to think that if I'm not around, something's going to happen to me? And at first, I thought, well, maybe it has to do with there was a missionary earlier in the year who had been kidnapped, and we talked about that. We were, as a family, we were talking about that. So maybe he was too young, and that really impacted him talking about that. So he thinks I'm in danger, but it wasn't that. And what it turned out to be, and we talked about this, and I was able to sit down with him and talk with him about it. About a year ago, I was at this stressed out point and got into, a discussion, heated discussion with my wife, which is normal. These things happen. And I dealt with it sometimes the way I deal with it was not right. I just walked away. I said, I got to go. And that's not how you deal with it. And I just walked away. And I actually, at that time, I think I got in the car and left. And just like, I got
Hmm.
to go cool off or whatever. Um, which was wrong of me. But the way it was interpreted by my youngest son was that I'm leaving. And I'm telling you, it breaks my heart thinking about it
Hmm.
right now because I didn't know that's how he
Hmm.
interpreted
Hmm.
it. I didn't know that's what he felt. I just thought
Hmm.
I just got to get away, collect my thoughts,
Hmm.
come back and deal with this. And I came back, and my wife and I dealt with it. I dealt with it.
Hmm.
We reconciled it, right? But I didn't realize that impacted him. So that was such a traumatic event because in his mind he thought I left. I was gone. I was out of here. And it wasn't until just now that we sat down and talked, and he started crying, and I realized I had no idea that my actions,
Hmm.
because I didn't deal with this stressful situation correctly,
Hmm.
caused him to think this
Hmm.
way. So now every time I'm not around, he thinks, "Did Dad leave?" Now I'll tell you, that's
Hmm.
heartbreaking for a father that I put my son in a situation where I'm making him think that I'm not
Wow.
going to be there. And we had a great conversation, and we were able to
Hmm.
work through it. And now I'm intentionally, walking with this through him. And I
Hmm.
reassured him, "I will never leave your mother. I love your mother." Once in a while we get into
Hmm.
discussion because
Hmm.
we're both strong-willed and we both express our opinion. And just the other day, I said, "Well, just do you remember in the car, we got into a heated discussion over a dessert that I wanted to eat, and we both said some things we shouldn't have to each other in front of the kids, but within seconds we reconciled it. I was wrong to say that." And I said, "Do you remember we made it right immediately?" He said, "Yeah, yeah." And I said, "Well,
Hmm.
I didn't do that the
That's
last
good.
time." And it was completely on me. I said,
Hmm.
You're always going to you'll have run-ins with your siblings. You'll have it doesn't mean you don't love them. I will never leave you. I'll never leave your mother." And I said, I was so wrong to make you think that. And so we're working through that. So all that to say is we all deal with stress in a different way. And I've learned, okay, my way is not a healthy way of dealing with it. I've got to face it head on.
Hmm.
And I have got to, I'm a very passionate person. When I preach with passion because I love the Word of God. I love Christ. I love what I do. But that passion comes from a deep place where it can go the other way. And that passion it can turn
Hmm.
into anger and it can turn into an aggression that I know is there. That if the Spirit of Christ does not give me temperance, then
Hmm.
the stress can bring that up. And for me, walking away from situations where I'm getting heated, that was my way of thinking, okay, that's the way I'm not letting this, the way I know I might want to deal with it. I don't want it to get out of control. but that's not the godly way to deal with it. It only makes it worse. So I've had to learn,
Hmm.
okay, I have got to seek immediately, ask the Spirit of Christ to fill me, ask the Spirit of Christ to give me temperance, and then deal with it head on in a manner that Christ would deal with it. It's not always easy, but that's so I want to share that because we don't
Hmm.
always we don't always talk about our vulnerabilities and when we're wrong,
Sure.
and that's my huge that was I'm learning even now. I've been doing this 20 years. I've been missionary, and it's like, okay, I should have dealt with this a long time ago with how I deal with stress and confrontations and things like that. And we're working on that. And, there's always room for growth. Um, and so, yeah, that would be on my aspect. Other than that, like other situations, like stress, I don't really, I kind of just go with the flow of things. And so, like,
Hmm.
I've had those experiences, though, what you're talking about, where the anxiety and I think Eric, it's important that we talk about this because I never thought I'd be somebody who would be like who would like be so overwhelmed with anxiety and stress that I would almost like pass out. And I've experienced that a couple times, and it's like, wait a second, that's not who I am. I'm a missionary. I'm not supposed to. I'm not supposed to get overwhelmed like this to the point where I was almost getting dizzy and couldn't catch my breath. This is not like this isn't who I am, and it can be embarrassing. It's like, wait a second, but it's a reality that I think contributes to a lot of missionaries and pastors stepping away from the ministry because we don't know how to engage it and speak to it. And I
Hmm.
think you mentioned, yeah, you seek it when you reached out to others. Maybe there's a fear there that I'm going to be judged or looked down on, but you said it when you reached out. You were surprised how many have gone through the same experience, right?
Yeah, and it's so good to hear that testimony as well. I think for me, one of the things I've been realizing is that when you hit middle age, as you know, your life, your body starts changing, and you know, eh, I know those things, but when it becomes dramatic, it's a hard adjustment. And talking to some Christian counselors, talking to the medical professionals, they were all backing this up, saying like you're just in this range that what you're experiencing is very common. And so when you don't know that it's common, it helps to hear that it's common. You talk to people who've gone through it. It's usually different flavors. It's not everyone doesn't have the exact same story as you, but there are a lot of similarities. And one of the things that I'm more excited than ever is to understand. I was encouraged. I talked to a lot of pastors, Josh, who had struggled with physical ailments for like 20 years. And I didn't know it. And when I looked at their lives, I had such a deep admiration for them, thinking, man, it would have been so easy to say, I can't do this stressful job of dealing with everyone's problems as a pastor or a missionary. I'm going to go work this 9 to 5 where I can stay in my cubicle and really not, kind of get, provide for my family and do our little life. But these guys didn't. And so that for me, like when I came back, was like, I don't know that this problem's ever going to be like, oh, that was a speed bump in my life and I never had to worry about that again. No, I don't know. I think in some ways I've had to learn. I'll tell you one of the things. I don't think this is your personality, Josh, but this is my personality. I plan A, B, C, D, and E. I'm one of those guys that's always thinking, well, if this doesn't work, we're going to do this. This doesn't work. And I learned that's foolish. That's too much. Like that's not relying on the Lord enough. You do need to make a plan. You do have to be wise. You should think of a plan B if something goes wrong. But I was just too focused on everything in my life that just like, well, if this doesn't work, we'll do this. And this doesn't work, and that just wasted too much time. And I also learned that there's a lot of things in life that are just I don't care. It doesn't. I don't need to worry so much about it. So be it. Like let's do that or let's do that. Instead of overanalyzation of life. And I realized that had stressed me out to a large degree, to the point where now even my wife and I we like discuss everything, and to the point now I say, you know what, you are about the most talented, intellectually smart person I know. I will give you the authority to make this little small decision. Go with it, just because like it's silly that we can fill our lives with so many mundane things as well when there's so many big things out there to really to be concerned with. And so that's one of the things I've been working on. I'm going to take some water here. One of the things I've been working on is how to properly deal with that kind of stress when it arises, because you can't just avoid all the stress in your life. And then the other thing is, Josh, is a constant assessment, physically especially. How's your blood pressure? How's your mental health? How are you spiritually? Are you growing in the Lord? Are you seeing your life invested in the others? But then the other thing that's the newest thing for me, and this is one of the things I've been working on hard, is writing down some of the things that bring fears or anxiousness, and okay, how am I going to take this head on? I'll tell you something silly, but something I've been doing the last couple of weeks, the last week or so. For whatever reason, whenever I would go to the doctor's office and they would take my blood pressure after I had got my medication and we had kind of figured out what was going on, it was pretty reasonable. It was like 110/80. It was right in that range it should be. It shouldn't be. It wasn't elevated. But for whatever dumb reason, when I would put on the heart monitor or the blood pressure thing in my own home and do it myself, I would be like 140, 150, 160. I'm like, I'm not doing this right. And it would mess with my head. And so to the point where I just put it away. I said, I'm taking my medicine, I'm exercising, I'm not worried about this thing, because it would really mess with me the rest of the day. Well, a week or two ago, on my list, there was one of those things that just brings this, anxious and distress. I said, I'm going to try to tackle this. And I watched YouTube videos, how you can properly take your own blood pressure, make sure I was doing it correctly. And they gave some really good pointers. That the first day I took it, I thought I was working it right. It said like 149. This is like 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, this is no way this is true. And so I made some adjustments, and the next reading was like 124. And then it said, wait a minute, told you some techniques. The next test was like 110. I was like, all right, I was doing it wrong, and I was stressing out. And it's a silly little thing. It's an example. Like, I'm sure everybody has an example. But how to tackle a fear and stay at it, and the Lord's going to help you go through it. And then once you tackle it, you're like, I checked that one off. I don't have to worry about that anymore. And so how you handle stressful situations, and when you're ready, how to have victory over them.
Yep. And I want to approach this maybe just from the physical aspect and the mental aspect. Obviously, there's a spiritual aspect to it, and I think there's plenty of verses that we could quote on how to maintain spiritually healthy, how to keep yourself spiritually healthy in stressful situations. But to be honest with you, I think a lot of pastors and missionaries, we're always consuming the Word of God, we're studying it. And so sometimes we blur the line between studying the Word of God and meditating on it for our spiritual health. But that's another topic I wanted to maybe touch on, the mental and physical aspect. And if you're a missionary pastor, we do focus on the spiritual to the neglect of the body oftentimes. And I think it's important to understand. So if you're a missionary, you are facing stress. There's everyday stresses that are magnified because you're in a different culture with a different language, and there are underlying factors that you don't even realize are there that are upping the amount of stress and the burden of stress that you're facing every day. And so it doesn't matter where you go. If you grew up in America or Canada and you go to a foreign mission field, it doesn't matter how much in love you are with the culture and the people, there are stress factors that you don't even realize are wearing down your body. So a lot of times what we do when you know that you're under stress and that, okay, I'm committed to the ministry, I'm giving myself to this work, you don't necessarily, you might not say I deserve a break, but you will justify rewarding yourself with pleasure. And a lot of times those pleasure can be just junk food. Okay, I'm going to reward myself. I deserve this bag of chips. I deserve this chocolate. I deserve this. You don't say it, but in your mind, you're like, hey, and actually it makes me feel good. And on the surface, when we seek to reward ourselves with pleasure because we're stressed out, and by pleasure, whatever it might be, I'm going to sit down and, watch a movie, or I'm going to sit down and play a video game for a bit. Those things, if we enjoy it, it may release endorphins, it may release those chemicals, the serotonin and all of that dopamine in your body, but it's only temporary and it actually doesn't bring any benefit. Now, it's not to say those things are wrong in and of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
but I think what happens is
Right.
it makes the situation worse because your body isn't improving. You're only given a temporary masking of the stress. So, just speaking from a physical and mental aspect, I'm not a doctor, so don't take this as any sort of medical advice. But from the research I've done about the benefit of exercise on the body, I've learned to try to train myself to say, okay, I've been stressed out. I've been, overworked, and there's a lot going on right now. I'm going to reward myself with discipline of exercise. Now, it's a hard thing to think, okay, I'm going to feel more fulfilled and rewarded physically if I exercise and put my body through pain. It's actually in the long
Mm-hmm.
term more beneficial mentally and physically than sitting on the couch and enjoying a big bowl of ice cream watching my favorite movie. Both of them are fine, but there's long term benefits to it. So just some things I wrote down. When you exercise and you develop a discipline exercise, it releases a feel good neurotransmitters, right? So you have endorphins that are released,
Mm-hmm.
natural painkillers, and mood elevators. You got dopamine, serotonin that's released,
Mm-hmm.
which helps to reduce stress. There's neoprephin, which increases your alertness, your energy levels, and your ability to handle stress. When you exercise, it reduces cortisol in your body, which is a stress hormone. So it actually helps to reduce stress. Um, it will help to regulate your daily stress.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, while you might be dealing with it efficiently spiritually, your body's not handling it if you're not disciplining it with
Mm-hmm.
exercise. And so if you put an hour a day into some exercise, your body is now like, okay, I can handle this stress because I'm more balanced out here, and I'm not just
Mm-hmm.
masking it with guilty pleasures that have no ultimate benefit. And so, obviously, exercise is going to stimulate other growth factors, um, blood flow and oxygen to the brain. It regulates your endocannabinoid system, which also helps with calmness. Okay, going to the States, it's unbelievable to me how much marijuana is just everywhere. The city we live in, it just reeks of marijuana now. And this is in rural
Wow.
Michigan, just ridiculous. So they're just everywhere. Cannabis is. Well,
Wow.
actually, exercising. When you exercise, it releases the same hormone that cannabis does. So it's way
Mm-hmm.
better for you. Exercise. I hope missionaries aren't out there,
Yeah.
smoking pot.
Yeah.
But anyway, um, but the point is, God designed your body in such a way that if you're willing to commit to these disciplines, then your body will handle those stresses in a more beneficial way. And look, the Apostle Paul, oftentimes in his writings, he would compare physical disciplines to spiritual disciplines. I'm not just boxing against the air. He would
Mm-hmm.
talk about,
Mm-hmm.
running the race, and he would talk about the
Mm-hmm.
benefit of these things because spiritual disciplines are reflective of our physical disciplines. And so I just want to throw that out there. I just want to say, hey, missionary pastor, it's easy for you to justify, hey, I'm in a good place spiritually, but I need to just relax for a minute and enjoy this big ice cream cake or whatever it might be, because I need to just step away for a minute. Well, maybe step away and go for a walk, or step away and do some jumping jacks or lift weights. I'm actually transitioning now where my wife and we walk. I used to do a lot more high intensity workout. Now my body's just I'm getting older. My body can't handle the intense workout, so I walk with my wife at least 5 or 6 times a day for an hour, and then I lift weights. And so that's my way of trying to keep my body strengthened, trying to keep it exercised so it can handle the stressful situations um, that you're under as a pastor or missionary. So thought I'd share that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, especially all that truth about the medical advantages to doing that. That's, it's, I think probably a lot of missionaries felt like I did, which was like you mentioned, like, you give yourself these small pleasures, and like they're not bad pleasures in themselves. Like I loved Dr. Pepper. I mean, I would have the last 20 years. I had probably a Dr. Pepper every day, if not. Like it was a big thing. I prayed for the Lord to send Dr. Pepper to the Dominican, and He did. And though I felt like in the last couple of years I've cut down my soda intake. I know. Um, but it wasn't even that I felt like I was something that I didn't feel like I was something I was addicted to. It certainly was terrible for my health. And, you know, but as soon as I went through that, and I always felt like, I could stop at any time if I got more dedicated. Missionaries, to go to the mission field, you have to have certain amount of self determination. There has to be self discipline. I mean, lazy people just don't make it and last. Okay, it just doesn't work that way. But it doesn't mean there aren't areas in our lives that can be like that. And so what happened was I got to the biggest that I had ever been, physically, and I stayed there for like 8 years. And finally, my body caught up to me. And when I went through one of those watershed moments, let me tell you, I gave it all up. There was nothing. When you get scared enough, you'll give it all up, and you won't think twice about it. And I haven't had a Dr. Pepper since that day in the emergency room. And I cut out caffeine. I cut out most sugars. I cut out most breads. I try to do the 16 and 8, fasting multiple times a week. I get up every day. Riding bikes better for me for the high intensity. I like riding my bike and lifting weights. Let me tell you, I've lost 25 pounds, and I'm trying to hit 50 by my birthday, and it's great. I've never felt better. But I want to circle back. We were talking about the spiritual side. You hit on something that's so true, and you hear this, and oftentimes, in our devotional life, we're reading certain passages of scriptures. I had a gentleman, a pastor, share with me a really great devotional called Streams in the Desert. If you've never read it before, it is a great 365 devotional. I think particularly great for pastors because it deals with a lot of stress. It's written maybe 100 some years ago, but it's wonderful. It's called Streams in the Desert. We can put a link to it. So that's been encouraging. But another thing I've done, Josh, that I hadn't done in a long time, I listen to a lot of sermons, but oftentimes, Josh, they're sermons based on what I'm studying, okay? But I just started filling up my earbuds instead of with podcasts of other types with just good preaching. All kinds of preaching, preaching different languages, Spanish and English. And as I work out in the morning, I listen to messages that have nothing to do with what I'm studying, just great Bible messages. And I tell you, in about a month and a half, I've never felt so healthy in all three aspects of my life. And, I encourage missionaries who may be going through some doldrums, just cut out more of the world and put more of God's word in your life. Whether it's an audible book, I do that, good Christian books, or, maybe there's a Christian daily devotional on the radio or whatever, or just good preaching. That spiritual, that mental aspect of really trying to make sure everything's in its correct order and how you handle things like you talked about your family, and then your physical exercise. Really push that body to get into great shape. It really is a high that is better than I'm sure that you can get from drugs when you feel like you're accomplishing, your body's getting stronger. And not everyone can do it the same way. It's got to be designed for your personality. But boy, it's silly to think that it took me 47 years to figure that out. But I'm sure glad, and I'm praying for that. Hopefully, the next 47.
Well, praise the Lord. I think this is such an important topic. I'm glad we were able to touch on it. There's so much more that we could address. Speaking about this, and maybe in the future we can try to bring on some professionals who actually know a little more what they're talking about on the psychological, mental side of dealing with stress. I was privileged to visit a church last year, a new supporting church in the South. They're located just outside of Fort Bragg, and so it's the majority of their members are a lot of them are retired military. There was one guy there, big guy, and his job is to train Green Berets and how to knife fight. I'm like, okay, you don't want to mess with this guy. But it was neat because a lot of the men in the church have ministries. They're former military, but they're ministries, and they've taken education. They've gone far in their education, and they're trying to help churches, equip churches on how to help soldiers navigate PTSD and understanding the very real mental aspect of it. It's spiritual, but it's deeper than that. And so I touched on it a little. I didn't get much into it. Maybe we'll do that another time. But sometimes you go through traumatic events that you may not even realize affect your perspective of how you view every other situation that you experience. And missionaries, that happens. I've seen it happen firsthand, where missionaries have been kind of blindsided by the community and threatened, and a lot of that, and it affects their outlook of the people they're trying to reach. I won't go into a lot of details, but those things can happen to where you become so skewed in the way that you view things, you become so pessimistic and negative that eventually, the only thing you can do is just pack up and leave.
Well, that's where our feed cut out right there. I apologize for the bad audio. We recorded 2 podcasts and my audio wasn't turned on correctly. And then our feed cut off. So we appreciate you tuning in. That was kind of an abrupt place to end it, but our desire is to talk about these issues that missionaries face, so that missionaries on the field who are going through stress and struggles will be emboldened to talk to somebody about it and work through these issues. And then as well, that pastors and supporting churches and supporters, they can know how to pray and maybe reach out to a missionary and encourage them. Well, thank you for tuning in to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. We have some exciting interviews in the future. If you have any topic you'd like us to address, please reach out. Do not hesitate to contact us by email or any other means. Leave a comment. If you're watching this on any social media platform, be sure to like it, share it, leave a comment. We appreciate you being a listener. God bless. Have a great day.